Hello, this is George.
And Bonnie. I love the way that starts.
And this is Adonai. Thanks for your truth classroom. Tonight we're going to talk about Breshit, or Genesis 50. The last section, chapter. Or the last chapter of God's letter to us.
Amazing. Sure have learned a lot.
And I think we have learned a lot, yes, dear. Mm-hmm. But tonight you're going to have to be patient because my sweetie is going to have to look up a lot of verses, and we're going to have to give her a few seconds to get back and forth between one spot and the other. I think there's 16 verses she's got to read.
Not counting 50.
I've got to give her something to do.
No, I just sit here.
So, want to get started?
Let's go, dear.
Mm-hmm. All right. Chapter 50, or 50th section of Adonai's letter to us. My sweetie's going to start out by reading 50, verse 1.
Joseph fell on his father's face, wept over him, and kissed him.
Joseph kissed his father, the one he thought he might not see alive while he was a slave, a prisoner, and now a ruler.
Yeah.
Then Joseph had his father's body embalmed. Now that's kind of interesting because Hebrews didn't embalm. And they still don't.
Not to this day.
Hebrews didn't embalm, and Egyptians did. Now, why did Egyptians balm? To prepare their body for the next world. To preserve them so the dead could function in this new world after death.
Interesting reasoning.
That's what I wrote. You said that interesting.
Interesting.
I wrote interesting. Yaakov, or Jacob, whose family would have had to let their father's body be embalmed. Because it wasn't a tradition. It wasn't a thing that they did or do now. So my sweetie's going to read 52 and 3.
Then Joseph ordered the physicians in his service to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were spent at this, the normal amount of time for embalming. Then the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days.
Now, that's kind of interesting.
It is interesting.
It took 40 days to fully embalm a body, and for 70 days, even the Egyptians, with Joseph, mourned the passing of his father. They mourned him. Think about it. One of the top three in Adonai's talking usually is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, Jacob was mourned by the Egyptian for 70 days. I never ever caught that before.
No.
Now she's going to read 4 and 5, please.
When the period of mourning was over, Joseph addressed to the household of Pharaoh, I would like to ask a favor. Tell Pharaoh, my father had me swear an oath. He said, I'm going to die. You are to bury me in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Therefore I beg you, let me go up and bury my father. I will return.
Joseph asked permission from Pharaoh to take his father's body to Canaan, to, what you might say, the family plot. Nowhere is something No, sorry. Now here is something that jumped out of that reading. Even though Joseph had no one greater than him in Egypt except Pharaoh, Joseph wasn't allowed the freedom to just walk away from being Pharaoh's servant.
Did they ask permission?
He had to ask permission. You might say Joseph was his well-dressed, powerful personal slave to Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. He had to ask permission to leave. He was used to save the Egyptian people and his family, yet Joseph was so respected by the people he met. How did the Egyptians show their respect? And how did the Egyptians show it? Read 7 through 11, please.
So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went all Pharaoh's servants, the leaders of his household, and the leaders of the land of Egypt, along with the entire household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their little ones, their flocks, and their cattle did not leave in the land of Goshen. Moreover, they went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very large caravan. I bet it was. When they arrived at the threshing floor in Atad, beyond the Jordan, they raised a loud and bitter lamentation, mourning for their fathers 7 days. When the local inhabitants, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the floor of Atad, they said, "How bitterly the Egyptians are mourning." This is why the place was given the name, and I can't say it in Hebrew, but it stands for Mourning of Egypt, there beyond the Jordan. I can't say that.
That one little part she read. The whole house of Pharaoh, all his servants, and a huge number of Egyptians went with Joseph and all of his relatives, except the little ones and the animals, it said. They went to go up there and show their respect to Joseph's father. Probably because of the respect they had for Joseph.
Yeah, I would think so too.
His sons did what they had told their father they would do when they buried him. They carried him up to Canaan. Have you ever thought Joseph had reason to return, but think about this. But his brothers had a choice.
Yeah, they didn't have to go back.
All of them had a choice. Joseph asked if he could go because he was second in command there. But his brothers had a choice to go back or not. To return to Egypt or return to where they came from. But as we know, they all returned. Now my sweetie's going to read 47:27.
47:27. Israel lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. They acquired possessions in it and were productive, and their numbers multiplied greatly.
It was at least 10 years since the famine was over, and Joseph provided for the family through the famine, yet they chose to stay because they had great land in Canaan. Mm-hmm. Interesting, isn't it? They, his father, nor the rest of his brothers were bound to stay, yet they did. Now, in our studies, that was the first time that's ever really jumped out at us. It wasn't like they were made to stay there.
Yeah, true. Never saw that before. Never thought about it that way.
Now we're going back to 50, and she's going to read 15 through 17.
Realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "Joseph may hate us now and pay us back in full for all the suffering we caused him." So they sent a message to Joseph which said, "Your father gave this order before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you now, forgive your brother's crime and wickedness in doing you harm. So now we beg you, forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him.
His brothers still didn't understand their brother Joseph. And as far as I can tell, their father never said anything like that, so they lied to him.
Yes, because I don't remember you ever reading anything like that.
They didn't understand Joseph, and they didn't understand Adonai. And why he had Joseph do that. And Joseph realized that his brothers still had to make up things. It says he wept. When they, think about it, when they did exactly what his dream told them at least 30 years earlier, they bowed to him. Remember way back?
Mm-hmm. That's what Joseph said was going to happen. That his dream was.
I want you to read 18 and 19.
And his brothers too came, prostrated themselves before him, and said, "Here we are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God?"
Think about that. Joseph said to his brothers, "Don't be afraid." See, Joseph realized what he was doing. And he says, "Am I in the place of God? You meant harm, but..." Read 20 and 21.
"You meant to do me harm, but God meant it for good, so that it would come about as it is today, with many people's lives being saved. So don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." In this way, he comforted them, speaking kindly to them.
Because of what Adonai had in store for him, and his brothers did what they were to do, I guess, many people's lives were saved. You might as well have said, not just yours. Then he showed his kindness. Read 22 through 26, please.
Joseph continued living in Egypt, he and his father's household. Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph lived to see Ephraim's great-grandchildren, and the children of Manasseh's son Machir were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am dying, but God will surely remember you and bring you up out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Then Joseph took an oath from his sons of Israel. "God will surely remember you, and you are to carry my bones up from here." So Joseph died at the age of 110, and they embalmed him and put him in a coffin in Egypt.
Now read 41-46.
Yeah, I need this marker. Sorry, guys. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Then he left Pharaoh's presence and traveled through all the land of Egypt.
She read that Joseph served the rulers of Egypt for 80 years when he died. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin until they took his body with them back to the land Adonai gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when the Exodus occurs, which is a long ways off. But the family had it made in Egypt at that time. The land wasn't the land that Adonai gave them, but they lived and grew in a land a man gave them in Egypt. Now it's something that we have never realized about. Joseph, the savior of the Hebrew nation, and then there's this other person, and the savior of every nation who believes in Yeshua. Now, why am I stating something like that? Think about it. Think about how they correlate with one another, how they remind you of one another. Now, the first time this came to me, this was amazing.
Me too.
My sweetie's going to read Breshit, or Genesis, 37:20.
So come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those water cisterns here. Then we'll say some wild animal devoured him. We'll see then what becomes of his dreams.
Yochanan, now she's going to look up Yochanan, or John, 11:53.
1, 2, 3. From that day on, they made plans to put him to death.
Think about that. Both places they plotted to harm him. Both Joseph and Yeshua. Breshit 39:7, please.
Well. There's 6, verse 7.
Right after that.
In time, the day came when his master's wife took a look at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me."
All right, now go to Matanyahu, or Matthew 4:1.
Then the Spirit led Yeshua up into the wilderness to be tempted by the adversary.
Both tempted. Interesting. This is getting interesting. Breshit 37:25.
Turn the page. Then they sat down to eat their meal. As they looked up, they saw in front of them a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilgad, their camels loaded with aromatic gum, healing resin, and opium, on their way down to Egypt.
Now Matanyahu, or Matthew 2:14 and 15.
So he got up, took the child and his mother, and left during the night for Egypt, where they stayed until Herod died. This happened in order to fulfill what Adonai had said through the prophet.
Both taken to Egypt. Kind of interesting. This is getting more interesting all along.
Every time I hear it.
37:28, please.
So when the Midianite merchants passed by, they drew and lifted Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 1/2 pound of silver shekels to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph on to Egypt.
Now she's going to go to Matanyahu, or Matthew 26:15.
I'm getting there.
15.
And said, "What are you willing to give me if I turn Yeshua over to you?" They counted out 30 silver coins and gave them to Judas.
Both sold for silver. Breshit 39:16 through 18.
She put the robe aside until his master came home. Then she said to him, "This Hebrew slave you brought us came in to make a fool of me. But when I yelled out, he left his robe and with me and fled outside."
Matanyahu, or Matthew 26:59.
The head Kohen of the whole Sanhedrin looked for some false evidence against Yeshua, so they might put him to death.
Both falsely accused. Here's an interesting one, like the other ones weren't. Breshit 40, 2 and 3.
Pharaoh became angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, in the same place where Joseph was kept.
Now we'll go to Luke 23, 32.
32. Two other men, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him.
Now 41 to 43 also.
41. Ours is only fair. We're getting what we deserve for what we did. But this man did nothing wrong. Then he said, Yeshua, remember me when you come as king.
With two men, the baker and the cupbearer, the baker would die while the cupbearer would live. The two were executed with Yeshua. One asked for Yeshua to remember him when you come as king. Today you will be with me in Gan Eden. You might say of the two, one was lost and one was saved. Breshit 41:46 again, please.
Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Then he left Pharaoh's presence and traveled through all of Egypt.
He was 30 years old. Luke 3:23. Yeshua was about 30 years old when he began his public ministry. It was supposed that he was the son of Joseph, who was of Eli. Both started openly at age 30. Breshit 45, 1 through 5. See why I said it'd take a few seconds at a time?
45, 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm.
At last, Joseph could no longer control his feelings in front of his attendees and cried, "Get everyone away from me." So no one else was with him when Joseph revealed to his brothers who he was. He wept aloud, and the Egyptians heard, and Pharaoh's household heard. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is it true that my father is still alive?" His brothers couldn't answer him. They were so dumbfounded at seeing him. Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer." And they came closer. He said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. But don't be sad that you sold me into slavery here, or angry at yourselves, because it was God who sent me ahead of you to preserve life."
Luke 23:34.
Too far down. Yeshua said, "Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they are doing." They divided up his clothes by throwing dice.
Both forgave those who wronged them. Breshit 45:7, please.
God sent me ahead of you to ensure that you will have descendants on the earth and to save your lives in a great deliverance.
Now she's going to Matanyahu, or Matthew 1:21.
There's 20. This one. She will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Yeshua, which means Adonai saves, because he will save his people from their sins.
One saved his nation. One saved his people. if you believe in Yeshua. Bereshit or Genesis 50:20.
Whoop, there's 19. There's 21. Oh. You meant to do me harm, but God meant it for good, so that it would come about as it is today, with many people's lives being saved.
Now she's going to go to 1 Corinthians 2:7-8.
On the contrary, we are communicating a secret wisdom from God, which has been hidden until now, but which, before history began, God has decreed would bring us glory. Oh, I gotta read 8. Not one of this world's leaders has understood it, because if they had, they would not have executed the Lord, from whom this glory flows.
The actions that someone else meant for harm, Adonai used for good in both cases.
Yeah.
You might say, to his glory.
Yeah.
That's the end of our study of Bereshit, or Genesis. Took us, 7 months? But my sweetie's going to read something that isn't in hardly any Bible. Read that last part.
The very last, after 50, it's written in Hebrew first, and it means, be strong, and let us be strengthened.
Be strong, and let us be strengthened. You know where you find that? In this Bible, anyway. You find it in all 5 books of the Torah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just saw that today.
That is our study for the section Adonai sent to his children, Israel. And they call it Bereshit, Genesis. Mm-hmm. Not next week, but the week after, we're going to be starting the book of Exodus, or I call it Shemot, Shmot, Shemot. So, hopefully we'll see you next week.
Mm-hmm. We're going to be on. We're just not going to be.
And we hope you learned something in these last 7 months about Genesis or Bereshit that you've never seen before. What Adonai has brought out in the open. I know I have.
Oh, me too. But yeah, we will be on next week.
We'll be on next week with a special talk.
So yeah, please join us.
Yeah. Please join us and listen to what Adonai has for you. Next week, it's going to be interesting. God bless.
Have a good week, guys. Please like and share it. And check out our YouTube channel. Have a wonderful week.
Bye.
See you next Tuesday.